Hello everybody, and welcome to The Last of Us, Episode 1, Deep Dive Review. What I'm going to do in this video is actually kind of walk through the episode from beginning to end and give my overall thoughts in an actual kind of review manner, because for new shows I kind of find that fun to do, and I haven't exactly done that here before, kind of like a hybrid of what I did for House of the Dragon and what I do for Berserk. But that does mean this will be a detailed spoiler-filled review, which means if you have not seen the episode, I recommend you go do so before completing this video. Though if you want my spoiler-free thoughts, I thought this was really damn good and exceeded my fairly high expectations. I have nitpick complaints here and there, but that's really what they are, nitpicks, and I'm really excited to see what comes next. For me, it's sitting at a solid 8 out of 10, but before we jump into the actual video, a quick word from today's sponsor, me! I'm not gonna make this too long because I've said this a few times before, but I have a limited run merch line going on right now that'll be completely gone forever on the 17th. So if you'd like to wear a plot armor tee, which can protect you from all imaginary threats, a disheveled goblin hoodie, which is both comfy and cozy, or a Spank Books tee, just go ahead and check out danielbgreen.com today. And yes, I have been sending a personal thank you video to every single person who buys merch, no matter how large or small. Yesterday I did about 100 more. You will see my face if you buy that merch. Let's go ahead and jump into the episode, shall we? So it actually starts not with the same cold open as the game where you have Sarah walking around and very afraid within her own home, but instead we have a flashback to 1968, where the brother actor from The Mummy, who was forced to deliver all those lines where he's asking obvious questions about stuff that would be out of character for Brendan Fraser or the museum lady to ask. Yeah, he's in this. But Jonathan Hanna as this scientist really ended up delivering a performance that by the end of his opening monologue, his scene where he's explaining the possibility of a virus like this, I was chilled. And then the cinematography to back him up of just showing the people in the audience kind of still a little just odd, adding that tinge of disturbing, was super effective, and both Kayla and I looked at each other like, you're feeling this, right? This is working. But from there we cut to hang out with Joel and his doomed daughter. And at first my gut reaction was like, why are we spending so much more time here? It was so effective in the game with having this rather brief setup between Joel and his daughter to having her die. It really worked. Side note, I actually haven't played the game myself. I have just watched people play through the story repeatedly, not having a PlayStation problems. Though apparently the game comes out on PC soon and I will be playing it on my Twitch. Boom! Self-promo plug, twitch.tv/fantasy news. But for me, in those experiences, I really liked having just that brief introduction and tragic execution to just plunge you into this world. But in hindsight, I actually think for the show, what they did to expand it out here really worked, because it gave fans of the video game something a bit different, not just the exact same story again, and all they really did was establish quite a bit of the exposition that the game handled later on, and there was nothing really revolutionary here in how they were establishing the virus, like the background shots with the grandma. That's stuff I've seen before, but it was really effectively done, and just because it's like leaning into a cliche to establish a zombie threat doesn't mean it's inherently bad. And the fact that it was executed enough that when the old lady was in the background kind of starting to twitch, I was like, ha ha ha, no, do not like, this is bad. But like in a good, spoopy way. And I'm gonna say straight up, I was nervous seeing how much of the narrative and exposition was being delivered through Sarah at first, because I was like, look, we know this character's doomed if you played the games, and I don't necessarily feel any threats around her because I know she has to make it to a certain iconic moment, but everything was effectively done enough that I still absolutely felt like the creep with the old lady around her and just the general vibe of like her on the bus. I was constantly wondering like, what am I going to see in the background? And then on top of that, of course, the show can't be as minimal as the game was in certain ways. And changing mediums, there's an expectation of connection to character before you kill them off. And I feel like allowing Sarah to be the lenses we see this first third of the episode through, you as a viewer end up connecting connecting to her quite a bit. And so the emotional delivery of her downfall, which we'll see later on, is so well paid off. It's maybe just as strong as the game, in my opinion, but we'll get more to that in a minute. And I also like how quickly they got the characterization for Joel out of the way up front, where obviously where we're going to be picking up with him after the horrible incident that's about to happen here 20 years later, he's going to be an even harder, more jaded version of this character. But even here, before the escalation of the virus threat even fully happens, we see he's already kind of a pretty hard dude, and he seems to be trying to do his best for his daughter, which establishes that connection in a more thorough way that I think, yeah, if you have the runtime of this longer show, which, oh my god, this opening episode was a movie in itself, yeah, make me understand him more, make me understand his tragedy more, and get some of the exposition out of the way. I did immediately have that knee-jerk reaction of don't expand on this, but no, they did a solid enough job, and it made me just empathize more with the characters and understand the threat established. I can appreciate that. Even the little emotional things, just like seeing the watch get repaired and that, it was like, oh, this is gonna have even more emotional weight. And I'm sitting next to Kayla, who's never seen the entire game story before, and she's just giving me her raw reaction versus to me who knows what's coming. And I don't know, it seemed to really work with her, and it worked for me as well, so kudos showrunners. But then we get to the night it all happens. And again, we deviate substantially from the exact beats of the game, though roughly the same things are accomplished. I didn't like the separation of Tommy quite as much. You can see the argument that in the game, like, Tommy probably should have died, and some people will be wondering like how he got away from the situation he did in the game. So I can understand making it like, okay, they're separated by a car crash, and the impact of the first car crash and that claustrophobia, again, really worked for me. There was something bugging me the entire time though, and it took me a minute to put my finger on it. I was expecting, and I should not have had this expectation, that all of this sequence would be one shot, kind of like it was in the game, because you go through all these events in this unbroken level. And so it felt weird all of a sudden when we were having these cuts to different angles and stuff, and I was like, why is this bothering? I expected it to be one shot, which no, I shouldn't have expected that, I guess. It was just a weird moment of like, that I find odd. While they were actually in the town, I expected like more interaction with the truck from the mob outside, like more people slapping on it or something. It felt a little disconnected for just maybe some blocking choices, though I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what constraints they had, and maybe that's an entirely me thing. The set piece of the town was really impressive. There were some VFX that weren't perfect for me, but there were some that were great to the point where I'm not sure if there was one zombie who was just a extraordinarily committed stunt performer who was throwing himself around this CVS, it looked like, or if it was a visual effect or a hybrid of both. But it was so effective watching Joel run away while carrying his daughter with this thing chasing behind him that was just flopping around. Wow. Yeah, I think that's a real performer who's just taken falls. But then we get to what truly is, in my opinion, the make it or break it beat for this pilot, the actual death of Joel's daughter. Probably the most emotionally effective opener of all time in the history of gaming. Watching this father cry over the death of his daughter, like, oh my god, it's so impactful. So here, I was like, all right, let's see if they can recapture that feeling. And by the end of it, I actually had tears in my eyes. And Pedro Pascal, wow. I thought there was going to be more time with him grieving over her as she bled out, but after the look at Tommy and back to him, she's already gone. It's so sudden, but that makes it so effective and just... yeah, good lord, they did it. They really recaptured it in a way that worked for me. And like the look on Tommy's face and how crushed he is, it just... all these little things that came together to just make it the same level of devastating haymaker emotionally. I loved it. Or no, I hated it. But you know what I mean? I loved how I hated it. But then we cut to 20 years later. And the first of the real nitpicks is gonna pop in here for me, but I have to mention it. For the VFX backdrops of like the destroyed Boston in the background and things like that, they are very impressive, especially for a show like this. But they're not perfect. but that's as harsh as I can really be. I can just definitely tell that's a computer-generated backdrop in the background, but it doesn't look horrible. But I think that lack of perfection is made up for the fact that almost all the practical assets within this walled section of the new Boston, they so well accomplish making it feel lived in and real. For the last 20 years, this is the way society has changed and evolved, and you kind of just get it, because they also had this opening where you see a child come into this civilization, but he's found to have the virus, and so they put him down. And that was a good way for new viewers, for people to understand they have this device to be able to check that, which of course comes into play later on. And you can't help but feel some anxiety watching this little boy strapped into a chair as soldiers are checking him, and then it kind of becomes clear what's gonna happen, and oh no. We then cut to seeing Joel work in a body burn pit, which is horrifically dark, and I wish this had stayed disconnected from the scene before it, because we very clearly see Joel take that boy's body and throw it into the burning pile of bodies. I wish that had been left a little more ambiguous, and it's not specifically that boy. You just then have to later on see the red readout and understand that injection was putting the boy down, but instead they kind of do the thing where they show you the boy's shoes, and it's like, it's a little too much. It's a little too much for me. I got it. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. You don't need to show me that back to back. Or even it could have been at the end of the scene when Joel dumps the body in. Don't focus on it quite as much. I have a cat trying to break into the room right now. I'm talking about dead children, Mako. Come on. But even again, I found myself still invested in loving the scene, because there's this small beat of an unnamed character walking up to the truck, seeing the boy, and telling Joel, I can't do it. And Joel has to then be the one to carry the body. And I love having someone who's not a named character, just someone in the background, having that beat of humanity, and then also using that as a moment to reinforce, like, yeah, but Joel can. Joel can do something that dark and horrible, picking up a dead child and dropping them in the fire. And just finishing off the Joel tangent here, I think Pedro Pascal is not only embodying the character from the game really damn well, but he's also making it his own, and I feel like deciding, like, okay, I'm stronger as an actor taking it this way a little bit, so it doesn't feel like a one-to-one Joel comparison to me so far. It's just episode 1, I could be reading too much into it, but it feels like Pedro Pascal looking at what the character is and deciding to keep 90% of it and then take 10% Pedro Pascal's input, which I like when they do that. That way it doesn't feel like I'm just experiencing the exact same character again. Joel then goes to witness an execution where he meets with a guard and deals some drugs and gets some exposition done where he's like, hey man, don't go out at night, stuff's gonna be bonkers. And I'm so sorry to the man who played the guard here. Weakest performance in the show, in my opinion. It was just like watching Pedro Pascal deliver such a great performance, and this guy who does like a fine job, and for me I was like, you're gonna have to step it up to match him, I'm sorry. But from here we cut to a couple of scenes that Kayla, who has not experienced this story before, was actually a little bit confused by, and I only want to point that out because someone has walked through this story a couple of times. I understood what was going on, but maybe for people who haven't played the game, this could be a little bit confusing, so I'll try to walk through it as clearly as possible. Because we cut to seeing Tess after being jumped by a couple of guys who work for a sleazy battery dealer, is trying to talk her way out of a bad situation. Played by Anna Torv, who is another one of those actors who I went, Fringe! Like, there's so many of those actors in this show. And it was built up earlier that the Fireflies have been really active and a lot of attacks going on. So her trying to be like, look, I'm not gonna send Joel at you, just let me go, is interrupted by an attack from the Fireflies that happens to blow in the wall that's right next to her, not killing anyone in the room, but she's able to escape. Or maybe only killing one of the hired muscle guys, but not the main guy who was keeping her there. It is a little, like, convenient, and I can understand if you haven't played the games and you weren't really paying attention to the Firefly setup, you're like, what the hell just happened? Why was there a bomb there? And there's one other moment like that in the show, but we'll get there later on. And I immediately feel bad for Tess because she goes from this bombing situation to running out in the street, seeing this Firefly attack, and then being arrested for possibly being connected to it. And the next time we see her is like a day later when she's finally been released from custody and she just lays down next to Joel. And I was like, that's the shittiest day we've seen since the last day we've seen in this universe. But then we cut to Ellie being held captive by the Fireflies, a little bit of back and forth with her character establishment, and it wasn't enough yet for me to judge Bella Ramsey's performance, because it's kind of like a little kid putting on strength trying to tell her prisoners like, fuck you, you can't keep me here. But it's kind of hard to judge like a character when they're in that level of performance, like right away. I want to see them when they're more relaxed. So we'll talk about that more in a bit. But then we see Joel cutting in line in front of a bunch of people who are trying to get their message out through the radio. And again, we have Joel being someone who you don't want to mess with, kind of being re-emphasized here with someone being like, hey, you can't cut the line. And Joel just completely ignoring them and walking by, which isn't so over the top of him like turning around, doing something stupid like having a confrontation, but is like authoritative enough that you're like, oh, okay, this guy doesn't care when someone has a problem with something he's doing because cat. Not because cat, but Pips got up here and I wanted to show off my cat. Hi, kitty. And he is looking for Tommy, who has been missing for 3 weeks and never not responded in more than a day. Oops. So Joel is then determined to go rescue his friend. And I really like the dialogue between him and the radio operator there, where the radio operator is like, look, man, you can't go out after this guy. There's going to be so many dangers. There's literal slavers out there. Are you crazy? But then Joel's like, and you're saying Tommy's probably fine? Oh, well done. Logic, Joel. But he wakes up the next day and Tess tells him what exactly happened. She is in rough shape. And the dialogue kind of has this like descent from Tess where at first she's like, take a deep breath. Look, we're going to get past this. It's going to be okay. We don't have to go and murder a bunch of people. You really want to go get Tommy. Okay. And this guy does really suck a lot. Like, look, maybe you want to go get our car battery? I just like that, like slowly seeing her be like, no. Yeah, let's go fuck some people up. We then cut to the Fireflies, get some more exposition. If I had one critique for like set design, we're in the Firefly base, which is a group that probably has to like get in and out really quick. They're laying low, trying to be underground. I don't think they should have things like their emblem spray painted on the wall for anyone to look in and from the windows that are clearly visible and see, yeah, this is the Firefly headquarters. Maybe think more about that in the future. We then cut back to Ellie being chained up by the Fireflies, and we get the exposition of really hinting at what exactly she is and why she has been put in the federal schools but now taken out, or she escaped and captured by the Fireflies, and what they plan to do with her now. And this is where I was like, all right, Bella Ramsey, doing a good job as Ellie. I'm really excited to see where she's gonna go from here, and the little bits of snark and banter we get from her felt super true to who Ellie is as a character from the beginning to the end of this episode. Obviously, one episode is a bit too soon to fully judge an actor's portrayal of a character, but so far, I'm not seeing any major red flags, and I'm seeing quite a bit of green for all the major members of the cast so far. We see Tess and Joel, though, move through the underground. We have a fantastic looking, I believe, practical effect of someone who has been like totally spored up and they're like into the wall, and it looked so good. And we have a bit of dialogue back and forth that I think was performed fantastic between Tess and Joel, where she's like, this guy wasn't here the last time you were here. She's like, no, do you think he got bit and came down here? And Joel's like, no, I think he probably got bit down here because life is a fucking nightmare. But Tess and Joel get to where their intel told them the man with the battery would be. They break on in, and we find apparently a deal between the Fireflies and this same guy went south because a bunch of people shot. And apparently the battery was no good, which could have been the initiating incident for all of this. That's one of my favorite details. It's like, yeah, that guy didn't even have a good battery to begin with because, again, life is a fucking nightmare. But as Tess and Joel are moving through this shootout, Ellie just comes out with a knife trying to stab Joel. He throws her against a wall, steps on her knife, and puts a gun on her. Then seeing the leader of this section of Fireflies turning and being like, hey, oh, Joel, what's up? We're all gonna keep our guns a little bit ready, though, right? Because this is still a sketch situation. And as things escalate, Joel like moves his gun back towards the Fireflies, but then back to Ellie, and they're like, no, you don't know what she is. For the love of God, keep the gun on us. I also began to like the leader of the Fireflies here when Tess is like, the war must be really bad for you to deal with the likes of this guy. And the leader of the Fireflies like, yeah, thanks for noticing. It's terrible. Appreciate it. But things then play out similar to the way they do in the games, and because the leader of the Fireflies has been shot and her companion as well is wounded, they will not be able to sneak Ellie out of the city to meet more of their people outside of the wall, out in the infected zone. And so instead, she says, look, man, we will give you access to our car if you agree to take Ellie to where she needs to be to meet up with our people. Please, for the love of God. And the car will be waiting for them where they need to drop off Ellie. But okay, so here's what I want to say so far after watching the episode twice, once just with Kayla and now again while editing this review. What I think is helping it work so much is it's having this phenomenal balance of changing things very intelligently, where they could be improved due to shifting the medium, or where they just need to by the necessity of shifting medium. Outside of that, there are very few changes being made in the grand scheme of the narrative, and the setup is walking a very similar pace, at least it feels like, from a viewing versus watching someone play experience, and I find that fascinating. This will give Joel what he needs to at least start his adventure to go get Tommy, so he's like, all right, and him and Tess agree to take Ellie under their wing as they venture out into the most terrifying apocalyptic zombie space I think there is in any zombie apocalypse story. I do believe that The Last of Us is the scariest form of zombies to me personally, because the idea of those growths, I don't like that. From here, we get a scene where they take Ellie, I think, back to their apartment for a brief while, where they decide to plan the best way to go, and Ellie starts going through their things, picking up a little bit of details of Joel's life, and also showing she's fairly smart by kind of cracking his code with the billboard book. And we also get some of that iconic Ellie-Joel banter, and that's when I really started being sold on not only these individual two performances, but hopefully throughout the rest of the show, the chemistry of these two acting across from each other, because it came across well here. But from here, we cut to night and our party trying to escape from the walled-in city, because, you know, the government dictatorship in place doesn't exactly want people free-flowing out into the infected zone, which they're made out to be the bad guys for that. And don't get me wrong, I disagree with the dictatorship in place. Obviously not good dudes. But that specific policy, not against. That makes sense. I get why that's something you don't want to be going on. On their way out, they're caught by a guard who happens to be the guard that Joel was dealing with before. It seems like the guard agrees to be like, okay, after you all pass my scanner test, if you agree to come back and give me all the money you make on this run, I will let you go. But just as he is about to scan Ellie, she grabs her knife, turns, and stabs him. And of course, this makes the guard be like, what the hell? Because he was in the middle of just scanning her, and he's like, I'm gonna shoot now. Joel having, again, a slightly too heavy-handed, like, flashback to the situation, obviously, where a soldier was pulling a gun at him with his daughter. Now it's him with Ellie. They decide to actually show it again. You could have just remained on Pedro Pascal's face. I feel like his performance is definitely strong enough for us all to understand what he's feeling there. That's like a minor nitpick, but still, trust me as the viewer. I get it. We all get it. He snaps at this and starts just beating the face in of his guard, hitting him to the point where I was like, oh, they're gonna do a thing where they hit him a lot. Oh yeah, they hit him a lot. Oh, he's still hitting. He's still hitting him. But Tess then picks up the reader, showing that the positive result was returned for Ellie, meaning she is infected, but Ellie then gives her whole thing about like, no, but I'm not, like I was bit, but it's 3 weeks old, I got, you know, resistance, that's all I'm trying to say. But then our party runs off into the night, needing to escape the guards on their way. And it was effective overall. I really liked this first episode. Like, if it ended there, I'd be like, oh, that was a really good reinterpretation of the first section of Last of Us. And I enjoyed this from beginning to end. I'm feeling a really solid 8, as I said before. I have some minor complaints, but nothing substantial. I can see some people like totally picking apart the writing and saying like, ah, this was too blunt or that, but hell, my expectations were high, and I feel like they have been exceeded. The visuals aren't the strongest, but I'm hoping that means they've just used their resources in the right places to like make the clickers look incredible. The performances, I'm already feeling for these people, and I really, really want to like continue to see the relationships evolve between Joel and Ellie, and I think the world establishment has been very effectively done, and the changes from the source material certainly feel justified and earned, and it never deviates so much that I feel like I'm, for some reason, being told an entirely different story, Halo. Like, on the spectrum from this to this, holy God, is the gap wide. And depending on whether or not I'm able to get my next Sanderson review done in time. Today might be my final opportunity to remind you that the DanielBGreen.com merch drop will be ending the 17th at the end of the day. So if you would like to go ahead and bear arms with me by putting on a hoodie, go ahead and check out DanielBGreen.com, and thank you again, Kayla, for designing such a great line. Let me know what you thought of this first episode of The Last of Us in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and hit the Patreon if you'd like to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.